It's also, as you and I talked about, we can share with our audience. It's also just hitting that strike zone every day,
Right, of course.
giving it up.
Of
All right,
course.
we're pulling our audience together. And we're getting the band back together again. Don't adjust that dial. That is Adam Klasfeld of All Rise News on our 12 o'clock first breaking briefing. Boy, we have a lot to talk about. Thought I was going to have a quiet Sunday night. I was telling our audience last night, I do the Monday morning video to kick off Legal AF the night before, obviously. And, you try to pick something that is timely and interesting. And I was working on one issue, kind of pulling all the papers together. And then the news breaks about Jay Powell being the subject of a open grand jury, subpoenas, all about the criminal cost overruns of the Federal Reserve, led by our contractor in chief, Donald Trump, that has already doubled the cost of his own golden ballroom raise. It's just, again, he doesn't care about the actual indictment. He just wants the headline of criminal probe opened against Federal Reserve chairperson, news at 11, the old headlines. And, but the fact that they got a grand jury up and running is just mind boggling. So you and I connected as we're getting our audience together here last night about jumping on that. Other news, of course, we can talk about, as well as the Democrats fight back against being blocked from ICE in the aftermath of
Right.
Rebecca Good's murder. That's up and running today. I just did an interview with Sruti Swaminathan at the American Civil Liberties Union about tomorrow's oral argument in Becky Pepper Jackson's case, that brave 15-year-old. She's the only transgender athlete in the high school in the entire state of West Virginia. And their people have been waiting in line for 3 days from the MAGA right-wing agitators like Riley Gaines and the rest in order to sit in the gallery to watch this poor 15-year-old. All she wants to do is throw a shot put on her high school team. She started when she was 11. She's now 15 as this case wins its way. And we'll have that live on Legal AF YouTube. I'll do a little pregame introduction at 9:30, 10 o'clock a.m. Eastern time will be this landmark cases. Because the Supreme Court has made it landmark. They've already made a couple of rulings in the transgender area. And just to put it in perspective for our audience, we're not going to talk about transgender much longer, about this issue of how the MAGA right wing uses the issue as a wedge issue to put Americans at each other's throats and to draw votes to their party. There are 500,000 college athletes. You know how many, Adam, identify openly as transgender?
I would imagine it's in the dozens or less.
10. Less than a dozen. You can count on two hands out of 500,000. And yet, to listen to MAGA, you would think that this is such a problem that the entirety of West Virginia had to come after a 15-year-old. But these issues are broader than that. This is about what kind of America we live in. This is not just about, whether she gets to throw a shot put or not. But the thing that boils my blood is when I read their brief for tomorrow's oral argument. And West Virginia writes, Becky Pepper Jackson, or BPJ, she's already outed herself.
Right.
A biologically born male who identifies as a female, completely missing that she's been on puberty blockers since she was 10 or 11 years old, that she's had gender affirming care, that she is not a quote unquote man playing against girls. But that doesn't fit with their narrative. So that gets left off of the briefing. And the only good thing about tomorrow is John Sauer is not, for the Solicitor General's, the U.S. Solicitor General is not arguing tomorrow, but we'll be covering that live on Legal AF YouTube. But Adam, why don't you kick off what you've picked up since and tell our audience what happened so far with the Federal Reserve, Jay Powell, DC U.S. Attorney's Office. It looks like a grand jury. Kind of catch them up on anything else you've learned in the last 12 hours about the case.
Well, the latest news about the grand jury with Jerome Powell is that a second Senate Republican breaks ranks, Lisa Murkowski. She just went out and said that if, and this is a direct quote, if the Department of Justice believes an investigation to Chair Powell is warranted based on project cost overruns, which are not unusual, then Congress needs to investigate the Department of Justice. She says that she's going to suggest that she'll join Senator Tillis in blocking any Federal Reserve nominees. For folks who are just kind of catching up to this news, this investigation was referred originally by the MAGA Republican Congresswoman Anna Paulina Luna.
Down in Florida.
Down in Florida, the one who is always pushing Russian talking points. And in any event, she's the one who sent a criminal referral. But there's reporting from from Bloomberg saying that Bill Pulte is seen as key instigator behind the Powell subpoena. So here, history is repeating itself. We talked so much last year about Jim Comey. This is supposedly a false statements to Congress investigation. So this is Comey Redux, where Rep. Luna is sending a criminal referral based on statements that he made during his testimony about the renovation of the Federal Reserve headquarters in Washington, D.C. And then you have Bill Pulte, the animating force between the crash and burned investigation of Letitia James. And this is, of course, this huge red line. It's threatening, attacking the independence of the Federal Reserve, and that it's a bridge too far for two Senate Republicans so far. And a third Senate Republican, not again being unable to criticize Trump, calls it trolling. Wait a minute. Grand jury investigations are trolling? That's where we're at now, to avoid any sort of criticism of Trump. So we're at two GOP senators so far saying this is an abuse of the Department of Justice investigative power. It was greenlit by Jeanine Pirro, who, if she didn't endure enough humiliations about grand juries saying no last year, whether it was the sandwich thrower case or any number of other grand juries that rejected indictments, no true build, more times than most prosecutors will see throughout a career in the span of a couple of months. It's an outrage.
Yeah. Let me show our audience. I've got a video up on this on Midas and on Legal AF. But let me show an audience. Got to do it the old-fashioned way. I'm just going to play it off my cell phone. A couple of things. One is the moment where I believe Donald Trump decided, having been embarrassed in public by a really smart but modest chairperson of the Federal Reserve in Jay Powell, when they were doing the hard hat construction tour, where he tried to argue that with Tim Scott by his side, who also grilled Jay Powell about cost overruns. Just to put this in perspective, there are two buildings that were built in the 1930s and have not been updated since. So they're that the Federal Reserve is renovating for the first time, that are filled with asbestos and lead, that do not have proper fire suppression systems, have 100-year-old HVACs, heating and cooling systems, who don't have probably frayed electrical wires. It's hard to believe these aren't sick buildings. I'm sure they have been sick buildings, and now they need to be renovated. And sure, costs have been overrun by about $700 million or so, but there's a couple of things called, one, COVID, which created a tremendous pressure on pricing related to building supplies. And then another little thing called tariffs. And then another little thing called, when you start doing renovations of 100-year-old buildings, you run into things that weren't on the plans. Like, where did that water main come from? Or why? Oh, we can't put the elevator here because there's granite or bedrock there, or, things that happen like that. But Trump tries to embarrass Jay Powell because he's trying to get control of the Federal Reserve by getting Jay Powell to quit. He probably can't fire him, although he's now trying with a criminal attack on him, but getting him to quit before his May chairmanship is over and his 2028 seat is over, to gain control of interest rates. So He goes down with Tim Scott wearing hard hats, and he says, "Yeah, well, yeah, it looks like it's going to be about another $2 billion. You ran over another $2 billion." And you can see Jay Powell. I'm going to show you the video. You see Jay Powell shaking his head like, "That's not true. I don't understand that." "Oh yeah, one of your own documents." And Jay Powell takes it, pulls out his cheater readers, looks at it, and then schools Donald Trump. It reminded me when Barack Obama, at Donald Trump's expense, ridiculed Donald Trump at a White House Correspondents' Dinner, which everybody thinks is the thing that lit the flame to make Donald Trump run for president. Let me show you the video of that of let me get it here. Here we go. Get up, see if I get this running quickly. Sorry, everybody.
No.
3.1 billion. It went up a little bit.
You won't see the video, but listen.
So the 2.7 is now 3.1.
I'm not aware of that.
Yeah, it just came out.
I haven't heard that from anybody at the Fed. What?
Yes. That's it.
You're including the mark? Not just said on the entire top. You just said it in the third building is what that is. That's a third building.
It's a building that's being built.
No, it was built 5 years ago.
All right.
Right.
So what Jay Powell is saying to Donald Trump is, I'm working on 2 buildings. You are saying I'm $1 billion or 2 over because you added a building from 5 years ago that we did. And that of course, embarrassed Trump. Now, Jay Powell is not taking this lying down. And much like James Comey took to the airwaves, Jay Powell, against, I would assume, his own lawyer's comments, because he is the subject now of a criminal investigation, he took to the airwaves last night. Here's Jay Powell. Sorry, guys, I got to pull it up.
It's an incredible statement.
Yeah.
He did it on the Federal Reserve.
Right. The Department of Justice served the Federal Reserve with grand jury subpoenas, threatening a criminal indictment related to my testimony before the Senate Banking Committee last June. That testimony concerned in part a multi-year project to renovate historic Federal Reserve office buildings. I have deep respect for the rule of law and for accountability in our democracy. No one, certainly not the chair of the Federal Reserve, is above the law. But this unprecedented action should be seen in the broader context of the administration's threats and ongoing pressure. This new threat is not about my testimony last June or about the renovation of the Federal Reserve buildings. It is not about Congress's oversight rule. The Fed, through testimony and other public disclosures, made every effort to keep Congress informed about the renovation project. Those are pretexts. The threat of criminal charges is a consequence of the Federal Reserve setting interest rates based on our best assessment of what will serve the public, rather than following the preferences of the president. This is about whether the Fed will be able to continue to set interest rates based on evidence and economic conditions, or whether instead monetary policy will be directed by political pressure or intimidation. I have served at the Federal Reserve under 4 administrations, Republicans and Democrats alike. In every case, I have carried out my duties without political fear or favor, focused solely on our mandate of price stability and maximum employment. Public service sometimes requires standing firm in the face of threats. I will continue to do the job the Senate confirmed me to do, with integrity and a commitment to serving the American people.
Jay Powell, President of the United States, ladies and gentlemen.
Yeah, let's talk about a thing that you just said over right before introducing that, a statement that his lawyers probably did not want him to make. And
don't do the video.
when we talk about the timing of this, it's like we are a little more than a week away from the Supreme Court hearing the case of Lisa Cook, and you have to wonder how much that motivated this statement, how much Jerome Powell is saying, look at what's going on here. If you don't stop him from trampling all over Federal Reserve independence protected by statute, designed by Congress, this is what will happen. So this was just a clarion call, that he just delivered that calm, no pulling punches statement saying
Yeah.
this is what Trump is doing. And they started with Lisa Cook and they're amping it up with me.
But and to Adam's point, those that have just joined, we're on Illegal AF, a Substack Live, joined by Adam Klasfeld of All Rise News. Take a minute, check to see if you are subscribed to both of us. And if you can check by hitting the Chiron there, you'll see if you're subscribed. That's what supports independent journalism and commentary. That gives us the resources to continue to bring you everything that's on Legal AF YouTube channel, 12 hours a day of reporting, lives here, and everything that Adam does inside and outside the courtroom. So take that moment for us. And we got an amazing community here that's been built. I get between 1,000 and 2,000 people every time I do a live twice a day. So I do appreciate it. What Adam is referring to is on the 20 or 21st, I think, of this month, the Supreme Court had delayed in leaving Lisa Cook in her position as one of 7 on the board of governors for the Federal Reserve, the issue of whether Donald Trump can fire her. Unlike all the other executive officers and agencies heads that they have allowed Donald Trump to fire. The question is, have they put a ring fence around the Federal Reserve? We think they have, because in the summer, when they were allowing Donald Trump to lop the heads off of, Gwen Wilcox from the National Labor Relations Board, or the head of the FTC, or this other, the head of the Office of its Special Counsel, they purposely, in response to something that Gwen Wilcox had argued in her brief, said, "Well, you're not like the Federal Reserve. Federal Reserve is like our first and second banks historically, and there the president wouldn't be able to do that." Now, we don't know if they were referring to the chairperson of the Federal Reserve, like Jay Powell, or about Board of Governors. So you're right. I think you're right on point that this is, Jay, a very uncharacteristic. The first part was very characteristic of the video I just played from last night of Jay Powell, measured, moderate, an adult talking about it. The second part, where he said, what this is about is not the construction of the buildings. This is about efforts and pressure on the Federal Reserve and its independence. That was very un-Powell-like. He's come close to saying things like that. But this time, well, listen, when you have a federal subpoena against you and that you're cooperating with, an open grand jury, yeah, here's your chance to set the record straight. But I want to give our audience and with your commentary too some comfort here. Doesn't mean that Jeanine Pirro, as Adam outlined, is going to be able to get an indictment. They've been trying to gather evidence against Adam Schiff on mortgage fraud. There doesn't even seem to be a grand jury up and running. They tried 2 or 3 times against Tish James, New York Attorney General, even with a qualified prosecutor. They weren't able to get a grand jury to do that either. They're going to have to argue, not that there's some sort of criminal cost overrun, although theft of honest service. I mean, this is not his day job. He's not the general contractor for the job. Is whether he lied under oath when Tim Scott or others asked him questions about the renovation, where they try to make it like, oh, you're building the Taj Mahal. It has golden dining rooms and elevators and water fountains. And he's like, no, we got rid of all that because of cost overrun. That's what happens when you run a project and the costs spiral out of control. You got to start doing some value engineering, and you start getting rid of things you don't really need because the cost has gotten so great. But this is not his fault. It's not like it's not like the Golden Ballroom built on the wreckage of the East Wing that Donald Trump is building. And I'm proud. I'm happy that you're reporting that Senate Republicans are stepping forward to stop this unconstitutional attack on the independence of the Federal Reserve with this bullshit story about Fed Reserve building renovation.
Well, and 2 so far. Right now, only Tillis and Murkowski, who said that Congress should investigate the Department of Justice if they're pulling this. But Bill Pulte, his appearance behind this, according to Bloomberg, he's the head of the Federal Housing Finance Agency. Why is he an instigator behind a subpoena about alleged false statements to Congress? I mean, and it really underlines what's going on here. They don't care how it looks. As a matter of fact, the fact that it is open and flagrant is what makes the intimidation useful. And, we have to take a step back and look at the fact that, yes, Jay Powell delivered that hammering, a thundering statement. But how many people in that position might have bent to pressure? And we talk about, do our institutions hold up? Do they not hold up? It's not institutions, it's people. And yes, the institutions are comprised of people who either follow the oath of their position, that aren't intimidated by bullying through the criminal process or through any other means, whether it's an angry tweet that can sick followers on them, leading to harassment. But that's been the ongoing theme about attacks on the rule of law and the fight against it, is that we have folks like Jay Powell delivering a statement like that when threatened with a criminal investigation, and that he chooses to step forward in the way that he did a week before the Supreme Court hears this case with Lisa Cook. So they know what the score is, and that they, cannot pretend that that doesn't have a real world repercussion. When they hear that case, that is essentially over whether a ginned up investigation is enough, if that means for cause. If Trump says, oh, we think she did a bad thing that's totally unrelated to her job, that's cause, then what are the limits? Is a criminal investigation, Jay Powell, cause?
And the other flip side of that is Bill Pulte posting out of context snapshots of documents, the equivalent of due process, because that's the other argument that's up at the Supreme Court, which is, did she get her due process rights because Bill Pulte, the Nepo baby heir to the Pulte construction family fortune, whose own parents have multiple mortgages listed as primary mortgages, first mortgages, and had to actually pay back because of their fraud tax assessors in their home state of Michigan. Did she get due process? Why? Because she didn't write a letter 5 days later to oppose Donald Trump's social media blast of her? Is social media blasting the equivalent of due process under the Fifth Amendment?
And Popok, we remember, we've been covering the litigation in the lower courts and these absurd legal positions by the Trump DOJ arguing that, well, she could have responded to the tweet. She could have tweeted back that this is the new frontier of due process. The government puts you on notice when the government flames you, when Trump flames you, when Bill Pulte flames you. And you have to answer those allegations not in a court of law with admissible evidence. So the government doesn't have to provide admissible evidence. They can just smear you. And due process is, well, have you responded to my tweet? Answer me, you cowards.
Right. Exactly. That's a very good point. Look, for the fact that, just to dovetail into the Lisa Cook Supreme Court, maybe, Adam, if you're around, you'll do the pregame show for me on that particular oral argument in 21st, I think, of January. I know that Trump's worried, and that's why they're going after Powell, because when the Supreme Court had an opportunity to benefit Donald Trump and block Judge Cobb's decision to keep Lisa Cook on the Federal Reserve Board of Governors in September, October, November, and all that, Supreme Court could have said, you know what, we're going to block that. She's off while we litigate whether she was removed for cause or not. The Supreme Court didn't do that. The Supreme Court didn't have the votes to do that. And instead they said, we'll take the case up. Let's have the case in January.
Right.
They could have done it in October when they first opened, but they were like, we'll see you in 3 months. She sits at the Board of Governors in the meantime. If they were really concerned about it, you would think they would have removed her like they did everybody else and then have her fight to get back in. But instead, it was the rare circumstance, maybe because we're talking about the Federal Reserve, where they were like, no, stay on the Federal Reserve. Let's have our oral argument in due course. We'll get around to it in January, which I know probably made MAGA and Donald Trump's blood boil. But to your point about Bill Pulte, they keep saying that poor Renee Good is a left-wing agitator. She's just a mother of a 6-year-old that sat in a car blowing a horn and a whistle, barely blocking traffic in order to oppose the ICE's actions on the side streets of Minneapolis. And for that, she got a death sentence executed by the Trump administration and Homeland Security. What is Bill Pulte but a right-wing MAGA agitator? As somebody in our chat just said, he's the scent-hound that's released by Donald Trump. And that's what he's been doing. He fancies himself some sort of future politician. He's tried to build a social media platform, Bill Pulte. He's used this Fannie Mae and Freddie Mac leadership he doesn't even seem to do his day job. He just goes after whoever Donald Trump sees as a political critic or enemy. And then does it in a way that is just completely disgusting and against our due process rights. Just takes clips and snippets of pages of mortgages and puts them up in social media posts and says, "Look at these signatures." And why don't you look at the whole effing file? How about the whole loan file? How do you defraud the same bank on 2 loans taken out from the same credit union? How about that? But they don't care about that because Donald Trump wants the headlines. Lisa Cook investigated for mortgage fraud. Letitia James, criminal probe opened. Adam Schiff, criminal probe opened. What happens after that, he really could effing care less.
Right. I think he wants the headlines, but he also wants the intimidation. And intimidation doesn't work if it's subtle. It has to be blatant. It has to be in your face so people know that the government will go after you if you are a threat to the agenda, if you oppose their agenda in any way. It's an extraordinary thing that we should really kind of appreciate the moment that we're in. About just how much the Justice Department under Trump has entirely squandered its credibility. That 2 members of the Republican Party, and it's only 2 so far, but let's see what happens in the Senate, have openly said that this looks politicized, and that one of them's going so far as saying that Congress really ought to investigate this, and saying that we should block all nominees for the Federal Reserve until the legal process sorts it out. We've seen over and over federal judges saying that the presumption of regularity has been totally squandered by the DOJ. That's something that just did not happen, especially at this scale. And that one of the things that we'll see come to a head when this goes to the Supreme Court, when Federal Reserve independence goes to the Supreme Court, is putting some sort of guardrails on the politicization of this Justice Department. And that's just where we are now, where it's, it's not new that you'd have some crowing by the party who isn't in power, trying to find some sinister motive behind this action or that action. But this is, that the credibility that Jay Powell had cultivated over several administrations, Republican and Democratic administrations, when he went out and said the Justice Department is going after me. The response wasn't, "Yeah, sure, Jay. Okay." The response was, "Okay, I believe this guy because what he is saying is part of a pattern, and this guy has credibility. And Janine Pirro's DC U.S. Attorney's Office does not. Trump's and Bondi's Department of Justice does not." The reaction to this probe, where he immediately is in the public eye and in pretty much all of our branches of government and the general public, the blatantness of what's going on has shaken people to the core, except for the markets, which seem to be steady today.
Well, the markets have already baked in that Donald Trump is going to be replacing Jay Powell, that he steps off May of this year from being the chairperson, and that they've already baked in Hastert or the other guy that's going to be the new person. The question is Donald Trump going to force Jay Powell, and I don't see it. I see a resolve about Jay Powell that I find uplifting. That he's not going to walk off at this moment in time and just step off from his 2028 seat and say, "I'll just give," because if he stepped off now, it would give Donald Trump a 4-3 advantage on the Board of Governors. They would then fire all of the regional presidents of the regional banks. They gain control of the Open Markets Committee. And now we've got Donald Trump setting interest rates at 2%. And if you think meat and vegetables and fruit is slim pickings now at the supermarket at an exorbitant price, wait to see Donald Trump with his hands with the fire hose of interest rates shooting out $100 bills, what that's going to do to the economy. And then he's done. He walks away and leaves us with the wreckage, because that is the problem. We got a time horizon problem here. Literally, Donald Trump's time horizon, politically and chronologically, and those of the American people are not on the same plane. They are different. And Donald Trump only cares about short-term political gain. He doesn't care about what it means for the long-term underpinnings of our economy, how you get what the Federal Reserve, as complicated of an organization as it sounds, and as many buildings as it apparently needs to do its job, it only has one major blunt force tool at its disposal. That is interest rates, setting them intrabank, which then flows down to all the other interest rates that are set in life for debt, mortgages, loans, credit, you name it. It's that. And they have two goals. They have really one goal: to balance job creation against inflation and come up with the right inflation, the right interest rate number to maximize jobs while minimizing inflation. That is their entire reason for being. So says Congress. Okay, that's it. It's not like Health and Human Services or Social Security or HUD or any of these other. They only have one job to do. But if we let Donald Trump get his hands on, as any dictator, on monetary policy, which is what it's called, along with fiscal policy at the same time, you think it's bad now? You wait. And I think that scares the shit out of the United States Supreme Court. That may be a bridge too far, even for the MAGA and the real conservatives that are on that's, I think, still live on the Supreme Court. I'm not sure. Fiscally conservative, I mean, business oriented. They understand the ramifications of this, which is why I think they had a jaundiced view, including the MAGA, of the tariffs. It all sort of folds together here. When it comes to business issues, they are very circumspect of what Donald Trump is doing and are not giving him a free hand. Immigration, migration, war powers, ICE, National Guard, even National Guard. They were like, that's too far. You've gone too far now. Got to rein you in, Trump. Because now they're busy sort of kind of reining him in, having empowered him so much through the shadow docket. But these are all the things that you and I will cover as this Supreme Court term continues. But for those that follow the Supreme Court, I was not shocked that January did not bring the tariff ruling or the Voting Rights Act ruling. January is not the time for major decisions. They just opened the court in October. It takes a while to write the dissents and the concurrences and the majority decision to put it into a neat 100-page, 200-page package. And it can only go out when everything is done. So if you're Ketanji Brown Jackson and you want to slow it down so that the Voting Rights Act case doesn't impact the midterms negatively, you take your sweet time writing your dissent, don't you? Nope, not ready yet. Sorry. And it just months play out, and now we're not able to have the Voting Rights Act change the congressional maps. So January is not the time. The earliest you usually see, major decisions is February, really March, April, and May. And then if they're really controversial, like ripping away a woman's right to choose, that's done the last day before they go out on vacation. So they're not around for the political fallout. So sometimes the stodgy calendar and political instincts of the Supreme Court actually play in our favor for things like, are they going to F with our midterms with the voting maps? And the answer, I think, is probably going to be no. You cover the Supreme Court as well, right?
Yeah, of course.
Yeah.
We have covered it together on Legal AF. I will say, and going back to your point about the tariffs, that this I think most people who saw those arguments see which way the wind is blowing. And to your point, yes, they did not let Trump oust Lisa Cook right away as he wanted. That was could be described as a rare emergency docket defeat, even though they didn't actually rule on it. But they didn't give Trump exactly what he wanted on this. So I think that is something we'll find out, but it could be seen as something of a bellwether of where this is going. And one of the things, I think probably a year ago, there was one thing that Powell said during his statement about his belief in the process, and nobody, not even the Federal Reserve Chair, is above the law. You see these statements and these retaliatory prosecutions where the people who are targeted by the government express the faith in the process to vindicate them. Compare that to Trump's prosecutions, where he's trying to tear down the courts, tear down the system, tear down the prosecutors at every term, the judges, going after the judges' law clerks and stuff like that. And, it became very clear even before the term really began that Trump was going to weaponize the Department of Justice against his political enemies. He ran on that. And I think one thing in a lot of journalists' minds, like I come from the background where you see the court papers and then you let the process play out. You don't come up with a conclusion before that process is over. I think the blatantness of what is going on being so visible, even to his political allies, it needs a response of informing the public of what the score is.
Yeah.
And I think the public can see what the score is, because it's just so blatant. It was blatant with James Comey. It was blatant with Letitia James. And here we go again.
Yeah, and thank you to our audience. We're here up just over the 30-minute mark. I'm trying to keep it sort of judicious with your time, but I appreciate everybody being here. We got almost 1,700 people that joined. Adam Klasfeld, All Rise News. If you don't recognize him from all of his great reporting, that's what he looks like. That's what he sounds like. And we have him regularly as a contributor on Legal AF, the YouTube channel. Now would be the time to help support. This is where independent commentary and journalism is living here on Substack. And Adam's got his own with All Rise News. Check the button. You'll see we're kind of co-hosting this. So become a subscriber to Adam's world if you're not already. And of course, here on Legal AF YouTube channel, if you become a regular member, you get this video in about an hour when Substack puts it up. If you and you get to be able to comment on this, I'm going to pull some comments here in a second. And then if you become a paid member, of course, that's the way that helps give us the resources to continue to grow. Great news. The American Civil Liberties Union has joined with Legal AF for regular commentary. It's starting. I have a new video that's going up later today talking about with one of the ACLU senior lawyers, Shruti Swaminathan, about tomorrow's oral argument about transgender Americans in sport. And I think you'll find that fascinating. Let me go over to our comments, see who's here. And a lot of people are really happy, Adam, that you and I are together. Yes. Jill Fuentes says, I appreciate both of you very much, which is always a nice thing to hear. I'm looking for also questions. Betsy 5231 says, I'm thinking that if he's doing this to Powell because of his embarrassment at that press event last year, perhaps the horrors of the ICE escalations this weekend are due to his shitstorm. Sorry, I had to check apparently literally of an oil baron's presser on Friday. Yeah, I mean, look, Donald Trump's goal is to capture every micro news cycle. New York Times just did a great study about every day Donald Trump does something. I mean, they have it like, well, okay, what do we do today? What missile are we going to fire today? Sometimes literally, in order to capture the news cycle and to get everybody talking about him. He doesn't care whether it's good news or bad news. For him, all news is good news as long as people are talking about him. He doesn't realize that's not how politics work. That's not how the election works. That's not how voting works. That's not how polling works. And certainly America is gearing up and geeking up to vote him, so to speak, out of office. come the midterms. But I do agree with you that everything is a response to something else, a bad news cycle. Oh, we're going to have a bad Lisa Cook oral argument, or tariffs are going to be torn down. I better do something about the Federal Reserve. I'm getting a lot of heat for the ballroom. Better attack somebody else about their construction project. Somebody wrote in here earlier, do you ever notice how many times what Donald Trump does, it's often a projection of what they're being accused of? Totally on point with that. And that. So, Adam, thank you for joining. I know you're back from some time off during the holidays. We'll have you for regular reporting on your own channel and over here on Legal AF. Now's the time. Hit the subscribe button. This video will go up in an hour because people are joining in progress, and we've been at this for 40 minutes, so you'll know what we talked about. And then join me tonight at 7:45 Eastern Time for my second breaking briefing of the day. Till then, Adam Classfeld, Michael Popok here on Legal AF.